Welcome to Lola's Frugal Life Podcast. If you're on a mission to be more frugal with both your time and money, you're in the right place. In this podcast, we talk about topics that help enhance living a frugal lifestyle. The goal is to save time and money where we can so that we can use the rest on what matters most to us. We talk a lot about both time and money management so that we can waste as little as possible on both. We do this while also embracing a progress over perfection mindset. If that sounds good to you, then please stick around for the latest episode right after a few quick words from our sponsor. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lola's Frugal Life Podcast. Today I wanted to get back to basics and just talk about tracking expenses, because I feel like sometimes when we start budgeting, we get really into tracking our expenses and, creating our budgets and really kind of staying on top of things. And then sometimes once we get into rhythms and just kind of, feeling we're sticking with our budgets and we're doing pretty good, we can kind of get out of that habit of staying on top of our expenses as much as we would like to. And it really does have a big impact on our spending. So if you feel like you could be doing a little bit better with keeping on top of your budget and staying with what you would like to be spending and making sure that you're not overspending when you don't have the money available in your budget, I would suggest getting back to tracking your expenses and tracking them more frequently. So this is one of the things that's had the biggest impact in helping me be successful with our finances, was the importance of tracking my expenses as frequently as possible. And I realize this might not be right for everyone, but I never had much success with staying within the budgeted amounts that I would set for myself before I started tracking my expenses much more frequently. I would set a budget and then would go way over almost every time. And the problem was that I was recording what actually happened after too much time had gone by. Once the week had passed, I added up everything and would most times find out that I went way over budget. I would be going along thinking we were doing great and that I hadn't really spent that much money. And then as I was recording what actually happened, I would realize I forgot about many of the little things that we purchased throughout the week. And when adding all of those up, it wound up coming to a lot more than we actually had available to spend. So I realized that it wasn't working to record everything after it already happened, because it was too late to do anything at that point. So there was no point in waiting to record my expenses at the end of the week. It was actually much easier to just record things when they happened, and it was so much more helpful in allowing me to see where we were at in terms of our budget while we could still have a chance to stick to it. Because recording everything all at once after the fact, yes, you're getting an accurate number, and it is helpful. There is use still in recording it because you can see what happened, but the problem is that there's not much you could do about it. There's nothing you could do about it at that point. Once you've already incurred all those expenses and you're over budget, you're like, okay, I know that we're over budget, so you have that information, but you had no chance to do anything about sticking to your budget when you still had an opportunity. So one of the things that I found to be really helpful is first to plan out the known purchases that are going to be part of my week. So of course my weekly budget covers things like gas, groceries, and like other things that might come up. But we all know that almost every week there's some kind of things that come up depending on what's going on that might be out of the ordinary. Maybe you're traveling to see someone, or maybe you're going to have to get some extra ingredients to bring a dish to visit family. I don't know, whatever. Things come up that you might have a little bit extra spending in a certain week that's different from other extra spending you might have in another week. So as each week comes, I try to first kind of map out, like, this is my budget, this is what I'm gonna probably spend based on our normal expenses, and these are kind of the odd things that might be coming up that I know I'm going to spend money on, and trying to kind of estimate what I might think I might need to spend on those. That way I can have a better idea of how much of a cushion there's going to be left in the budget for the week. So if my expenses look like they're going to be tighter in a given week, I will know that I really need to try to hold back on anything that isn't really urgent that week. It just kind of helps give me a picture of how much flexibility we have in that week's budget. And what I also do is I do my grocery shopping at the start of my budget period rather than at the end. That way I can record what was spent on the groceries for the week, because that's usually like the biggest part of my weekly expense. And it's one of the ones that is that fluctuates the most. It's some weeks are higher and some weeks are lower. Usually lately they're higher. So kind of knowing what that number is at the beginning of the week for me really helps me in seeing what I have left to work with for the rest of the week. So that's kind of like the starting point for me of just kind of keeping on top of my expenses, kind of giving me a future look at what the week looks like if we're going to have like a really tight week, or if maybe, a lot of the recipes that I was making this week, maybe I had a lot of stuff on hand already and I only had to pick up a few things, so maybe I have a little bit extra to spend this week. And in instances like that, I might try and see if there's something that I need to purchase maybe for a future week. That way I'm not just I'm not the type to just randomly spend stuff pretty much anyway, but I'm not just feeling like we have this extra money just to spend on whatever, if I might be able to utilize that to maybe put some money aside for a future week when our grocery budget is higher, or maybe if I know something's coming up that I need to purchase, I might say, okay, well, you know what, I know we're going to need that in a couple weeks, let me get it now because our groceries or other spending was lower this week, or maybe if we didn't have to spend money on gas this week because we're not traveling or whatever, maybe I'm working from home all week and I'm not really doing anything extra, and I may be like, oh, well, I still have gas from last week, so I don't need to fill up this week, so let me use that money to purchase this other thing that I know will be coming. Whatever the case may be, kind of planning what you expect your spending to be at the beginning of each budget period has really helped me in kind of coming up with a plan for the week to know, like, do we need to be really, really watchful, or do we have a little bit more wiggle room this week? So then, as far as tracking your expenses, like I said, frequently I have found to be the most helpful. So I would suggest, if you can, you can, but if you choose to try to set a goal of recording your expenses on a daily basis. If you miss some days, that's fine. But if you record your expenses on most days, you're going to have a much better handle on your spending. When I started updating my budget on a daily basis, I was so much more successful with staying within the amounts that I wanted to spend. Because by recording expenses right after they occur, you won't have the risk of forgetting about those little purchases that you made. I would quickly be able to see if we already hit our budget earlier in the week. That way it would make me aware that any additional purchases I had to make that week were going to make us go over budget. And that's not to say that something might not come up that I would need to purchase anyway, but knowing that that purchase was going to cause us to go over our budget would make me put a little bit more thought into whether I really needed that item or not. And it would also give me the opportunity to take a look and see if there was somewhere else I could pull those funds from. But when you don't realize that you've already spent your budget for the week, you might purchase something that maybe you would have said can wait if you knew that it didn't fit into this week's budget. It's having that information that can really help you be able to make decisions that will help you stick within the spending limits that you set for yourself, rather than just spending as you go along and not really keeping track, and then finding out you spent way more than you thought after it's too late to make any changes to your spending. So if you use credit cards, it's very important to add the extra step of tracking your credit card expenses as they occur, not when the bill comes. One way to handle credit card purchases is to record the purchase against my budget as if, I didn't say that right. One way to handle credit card purchases is to record the purchase against your budget as if you used cash. That's how I handle my credit card expenses, and it's really makes it much more simple for me to know where I'm at. So I subtract the amount out of my available checking balance, not in the actual check register, but I have a separate spreadsheet where I track my expenses and income against my budget, and it has a running checking balance, and I reconcile that back to my Quicken account in Quicken Duh. I don't know why I said in. I tie that back to my Quicken checkbook balance. But what I do is I'll record the expense against my budget. Like say if I got gas on my credit card, I'll show that as gas expense and it'll minus out of my checking account balance on my spreadsheet, not in Quicken, because I don't want to record an expense against my actual checking account that didn't really come out of my checking account and never will. That would be a nightmare with reconciling. But what I do is I record the expense on my checking budget worksheet that I use. And then at the bottom, kind of like a reconciling item, I add back that amount. So say if I spend $30 on gas, I'll say minus 30 above where it shows gas, actual to budget, $30 gas. So I minus it out of my checking balance. So it shows like that I spent that amount of the budget. But then down at the bottom, I'll put a separate line and it would say due to, I don't know, say Capital One, due to Capital One credit card, $30. So I minused it out above so it shows it as part of my spending, but then I add back the amount that is going to then wind up being paid to the credit card. So I've kind of accounted for that, and I know that this amount of money is being held aside for the credit card, and I also showed that amount against my budget. Now, by doing that, I have the money set aside already for when the credit card bill comes. So it just makes it easier for me to both check my budget and make sure I have the money set aside for the credit card. So there's never any balance that has to carry forward. I don't get caught off guard with a credit card bill that I didn't realize, I spent more than I thought. And what I do too is I reconcile that amount that I have listed on my spreadsheet as the amount due to that credit card to the credit card balance that shows that's due on the credit card website. So I always make sure that there's nothing missing. I didn't forget to record something because I tie that out to the credit card balance. So if you feel like you're not going to be disciplined enough, and even though you have that amount recorded and you might wind up spending that money anyway because it's available in your bank account, then you might just not want to use credit cards, or maybe make payments more frequently. You could do like weekly payments on your credit card to get that money out of your bank account. Credit cards aren't right for everyone. I love credit cards because I love getting the rewards, and I am very disciplined in keeping that money aside and making those payments, but I know that everybody isn't, and that's not right for everyone. So however you do or you don't use them, whatever. I know some people have very strong opinions if you should or you shouldn't. I think it's really a personal decision. I like using them, and if you do though, you do want to make sure that you have some way to track those expenses against your budget and make sure that you have the money set aside to pay the bill when it comes so that you don't get hit with interest. Another tip that I have as far as tracking your expenses and making it a little bit easier is to really try to limit yourself to one credit card if possible, because the more cards you use, the easier it is to lose track of the purchases. What I do though to avoid that, because I do have a couple of different cards that I use for different purposes. For example, I have one card that gives us better rewards on dining and entertainment, and then another card that gives us better rewards on groceries. So like I use one primarily for entertainment and I think it's gas. I forget what I said, whatever the thing is. And then the other one for groceries because I want to get the most rewards that I can. So what I do is I have like a little checklist of the credit cards that I have. That way when each time I sit down to update my expenses, I make sure I don't miss one. But regardless, the lower number of cards you can use, it just makes it easier to track the purchases. And if you do have a card that you don't use frequently at all, you definitely want to make sure as soon as you get home you record that purchase. Like for example, I have a Target Red card. So I used to have the Target Red card that was like the credit card, but now I have the debit card because basically it gets you the same benefit, which the reason I was using it is because you get 5% off all your purchases at Target if you use the red card. So first I had the credit card, then I realized they had the debit card, so I just switched to the debit card, which essentially just takes the money out of your bank account. But the problem is it's not real time, like as if you used a real debit card. So it sometimes could take a couple of days. So with things like that I don't have like an online tracking mechanism, or something like that, I make sure as soon as I get home, I record that expense, because it's so easy to forget and it doesn't come out right away. So it could be like, 2 or 3 days later, and if I forgot that I spent that $50 at Target and then I spent money on something else, well, now I'm like, well, oh great, that $50 just came out and I forgot about that, and then I spent money on this other thing. So it's really important to record those types of expenses that are not like what you typically might use, so that you can make sure that you don't forget about those purchases. Most importantly, just find a method that works for you. There are so many different options on how to record your expenses. Many people love using budgeting apps that allow you to track your expenses against your budget kind of on the go. I know some of them can even be automated, so if you really struggle with taking the time to record your activity, that might be something to consider, where it kind of matches up your spending against your budget by categories. I check my expenses, like I said, in a spreadsheet. That's just what I'm used to. It's what I've always done. So I like doing it that way. However you decide is the best way to track your expenses is whatever works best for you. But the most important thing is just to make sure that you're doing it as regularly as possible, especially if you find that you're struggling with overspending. The best way to avoid overspending is to not allow all those purchases to accumulate before you realize that you've exceeded your budget. So that's it for today. I hope that this was helpful in just kind of getting you back on track if that's an area that you're struggling in, to kind of stick to your budgeted expenses. I know it's something that I can fall off with sometimes. Oh great, of course my dogs have to start barking just as I'm finishing this episode. I'll wrap it up here, but that is something that I do sometimes get off track. I don't get off track with recording my expenses. I sometimes get off track with making sure that I'm sticking within my budget, and I get a little bit lax. But I'm going to end this now because my dogs are going nuts, and I will see you back here next week. So thank you for checking in for this podcast episode, and don't forget, you can always email me with any questions or suggestions at lolasfrugallife@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at lolasfrugallife, and you can find a blog post for most of my episodes and definitely all of my meal plan episodes at lolasfrugallife.com. You can also join our private listeners group at facebook.com/groups/lolasfrugallife. And if you enjoy the show, please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen from. And I would love it if you would screenshot the show and tag me on Instagram so I could see you're listening. Also, if you can please take a couple of seconds to rate and review the podcast. Those ratings and reviews are what help the show come up better in search results so that other people can find this podcast. So that will really help me in growing my audience. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an awesome day.